Welcome to Friday Friends, RI Elder Info's weekly look at the organizations and individuals providing resources for Rhode Island seniors, caregivers, and professionals.
Good morning, everybody. Happy Friday. I can't believe we're almost halfway through July. The summer is flying by way too fast. So as you know, this is Friday Friends, and I come to you every Friday at 9 o'clock with interesting guests there sharing information that you or someone you know needs to know about. So hit the like button, the share button, all those social media cues that say, hey, check this out. Because we're having an important conversation about some of the information and documents and that kind of thing that we all need, everybody over the age of 18. So please make sure you help us get the word out by sharing this out with everybody. Now, as you know, I am Deb Burton, Executive Director of RI Elder Info and the host of Friday Friends. And RI Elder Info is a 501c3 nonprofit, and we could not bring you Friday Friends without the support of our sponsors and our donors. So thank you to Point 32 Health Foundation, United Health, Oak Street Health, as well as 321 Media. And we want to give a big shout out to England Studio, as well as McCarthy Law and Washington Trust. Here's a quick message from McCarthy Law.
Here at McCarthy Law, we practice in the areas of estate planning, long-term care planning, elder care law, and residential real estate. Our focus is really on providing peace of mind to our clients.
If you're interested in scheduling a consultation with our office, you can feel free to reach out to us at 401-541-5540. You can also reach out via website at www.mccarthylawri.com. You also should check out our social media, both on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn for some helpful tips and tricks.
Everybody, I've known Samantha for a number of years, and I was really excited when we were able to have McCarthy Law be one of our sponsors for Friday Friends, because the information and resources that she can provide are truly amazing. And she's my guest this week, her and her mom. Welcome, Samantha and Tammy.
Thanks so much for having us.
Yes, thank you. I'm so glad you were able to come on today. This is great.
This is awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So we had some questions come up regarding the different kinds of documents that we need as we get older, having, some of those challenging conversations. And I was wondering what your thoughts and experiences around those things.
Sure. Yeah, so I'll share some of the documents that we do, some of the conversations we help put in place. The reason my mom's here with me today is she is our Medicaid paralegal, our specialist here, but she's also been a caregiver for basically her whole life for her parents, who are my grandparents. Anyone who knows our story at McCarthy Law and who's, checked out our website or heard me speak knows that my grandfather is the reason that this firm exists. And so I'm excited to be here today sharing some of this information with her. I'll share some of the practical stuff, and then she's got some more hands-on tips, for caring for the elderly, because my grandpa passed, but she's still a caregiver for my elderly grandma. So from the legal side, powers of attorney, you've heard us talk about it before. I think I talked about it last time I was on Friday Friends, but healthcare and financial powers of attorney are key. Making sure that you've designated the people that you want to be in charge of your financial decisions, managing your assets, making day-to-day financial decisions for you in the event you're not able to. And, the financial power of attorney covers more than just accounts. It's things like who can call Social Security, who can update a beneficiary on account, who can take a required minimum distribution, which is important for day-to-day life. It's also really important if you end up needing long-term care, because we need that information for planning for applications for facilities, for Medicaid, all of those sorts of things. And then the healthcare power of attorney, stating who can make your healthcare decisions for you in the event that you're not able to do so for yourself. And the good thing about powers of attorney is it doesn't take away your right to manage anything for yourself. So it's really just adding an additional, we call it like a helper. Whereas if you don't have powers of attorney in place and you're starting to decline cognitively, then you have to go to court for a guardianship, in which case there's a judge who you likely don't know who's appointing somebody, could be anybody, to manage your healthcare and your financial decisions And a guardianship does remove your right to be involved in your own decision making. So absolutely, while you have the capacity to do so, anybody over the age of 18 should really have a healthcare and a financial power of attorney in place. Deb, I'm sure you've seen with the seniors you've worked with as well, but those are super important.
Absolutely. And I got to tell you, I am great fun at the summer cookouts with my friends whose kids are going off to college. And I'm like, but do they have health and financial powers of attorney? And they're like, Deb, no, that's not for them. And I said, oh, really? The silly college games that they get into in their freshman year and they're in the emergency room and the hospital can't talk to you? Did you want to revisit having that healthcare power of attorney?
I have that same discussion all the time. And the thing is nobody wants to think these things will happen to them, but being prepared and proactive is so much better than being reactionary, whether you're caring for college students or seniors, across the board, that's important.
Absolutely. Tammy, what is your experience in seeing how these things work in real life?
Well, as Samantha said, I've been a caregiver most of my life, and I have had to learn the hard way sometimes, but I've learned that it's really important to keep good records. When you're a caregiver and you have a lot going on, it's not always easy to remember everything. So I think it's better to have things written down, have lists of their doctors' names, phone numbers, addresses, have lists of all their medications. I have a list on the computer of my mom's meds because her meds change frequently. And I keep a running list of what she's on now, but I also keep a list of what she's been on and when it was discontinued, because sometimes you see changes happen and we can't figure out why they're happening. And if you have a list of the meds, they can look at them and say, oh, maybe it's because we discontinued this medication, or maybe it's because of the combination of this med and that med together. So those are important things to keep track of. It's also a good idea to keep in their wallet a card or a piece of paper that says, this is my name, this is my phone number, this is my emergency contact. If you did your estate planning with McCarthy Law, we will give you a wallet card that has all that information. But if not, it's just a good idea to keep track of that.
I love the idea of the wallet card because, if you're out at the grocery store, say, and you fall and hit your head, 911 will come and they'll take you to the hospital. And what's the first thing the hospital's going to want to know? Who are you and what is your insurance? And so if you have that card tucked in there, now they know, oh, and here's who to call. So that's awesome. I love that you guys have that.
I think it's super important too, because part of the healthcare document is naming, who you want to make your decisions for you, but also what would your end of life decisions be? And so if we don't know who your emergency contact is and you can't speak for yourself, we don't know who can make decisions, who can coordinate your care. Like Tammy said, we don't know, what medications you're on. And so how do we even facilitate your care and your treatment in a way that we know is safe? But also having those conversations in advance so that if you got that call as the caregiver, you would know what mom, dad, aunt, uncle, whoever your loved one is, what they would want. We frequently walk clients through something called the Conversation Project. And there's a website, theconversationproject.org, where you can go, but it helps walk through end of life wishes, medical care wishes, kind of how do you have that conversation with your loved one and how do you document that? And there's other ways to do that, but it's important to know these things in advance of a crisis. And I think if you're talking through those things and your loved one has your emergency contact info, then you just make sure we don't have a crystal ball, but if something were to happen, you're taken care of.
Now, I think a lot of times people aren't necessarily comfortable having these conversations and they just kind of figure, well, my spouse or my oldest child just automatically gets to make those decisions. Is that correct or not really?
So legally, it's not correct. That doesn't mean that there's nowhere that would allow that to happen, but we have to remember that medical facilities and hospitals are always managing their own risk and their own liability. And so legally, nobody has the decision or the right to make a decision for another adult. If my child's 18, I don't legally have the right to coordinate their care to make their decisions, just like I don't for my spouse. And so again, that's not to say that a hospital won't let you if there's nobody else to speak for this person, but it's really important that you've been able to designate who that person would be, because you also don't know who's going to show up and try to make decisions. And, the words you used were they get to make these decisions, right? Nobody feels like, oh, I get to make these decisions for my loved one. We sit with so many people who are having to make difficult medical decisions, end of life decisions for their loved ones, and to have some sort of written indication of what your loved one wants provides so much peace of mind for family members who are in that difficult position of having to make those decisions. The MOLST form is one way you can let those decisions be made. You fill it out. It's a hot pink form. A lot of people have probably seen it, but it's important to keep it in your home, and it will say how you want your care handled. It talks about whether you want life-saving measures or not. Do you have a DNR or not? I know my grandfather, he passed in 2021 in the middle of the night. My mom called me and said, I think he's gone. And, he went peacefully, and that's what we would want. But the first question they asked, even though he was clearly passed away, was, does he have a DNR? Do you have this form that tells us what he would want? And so we did, obviously, and we were able to say this is what he wanted. And so we knew that he was at peace and that they didn't need to try to provide additional care.
And for people who don't know what MOLST stands for, can you just share what that acronym means?
Yeah, it's, I believe, medical orders for life-sustaining treatment. So it talks about life support, artificial feeding, how you want those things handled. Do you or do you not want that? And again, the healthcare power of attorney is going to go over that as well and designate your agent. Another really important thing related to MOLST, related to the healthcare power of attorney, is a DNR, which is also known as a Rhode Island declaration or a living will. And that's the document that legally, as you authorize a physician to withhold or withdraw life support and artificial feeding or not. And, some people have one and some people don't. The medical facilities will always ask if you have one. If you go for a medical procedure, the hospitals will give you one and have you sign it and act like you should have it. But we always tell our clients, you need to have a thoughtful conversation and be informed about what that means, because you may not want the physician to be the one in charge of that end of life decision. And you might just want your healthcare power of attorney to control and the agent that you've named there. And so sometimes you've done the planning and then you still go to the hospital for a procedure. They never ask if you have a healthcare power of attorney. I don't know why. I fight this battle every time I go to the hospital. But they're going to give you this living will and say, can you sign this and say that a physician can withhold or withdraw life support and artificial feeding? Again, maybe you want that, maybe you don't, but you should think about that in advance. Have that conversation with your loved ones so that they know, how to coordinate your care if they need to.
Tammy, how do you get those documents to the medical team or to the people that need it?
Well, the MOLST form is actually a form you can get from your doctor's office, and they have to fill out a part of it and they have to sign it because it is a medical order. But they have to have a conversation with you about what your wishes are. As far as the power of attorney, and whenever my dad, when he was ever in the hospital, I always had to go be with him. Even in the middle of COVID, he was disabled enough that he couldn't be left alone. So, and the medical providers couldn't possibly provide 24-hour hands-on care. So they allowed me to stay there. So I always had a copy of the form with me and I would bring it. But you should also take a copy to your doctor's office. You should take a copy to your hospital that you typically go to. They should have a copy of that on file. It's also a really good idea to make sure that your financial organizations have those power of attorney forms too. And to also, sometimes some banks will allow a power of attorney for you to be able to act for your loved one, but some require an additional form. Some life insurance companies require something other than a power of attorney. So it's a good idea to ask ahead of time before they would have a cognitive decline or an emergency situation, so that you can have all of those forms on file, so that if you need to make a phone call for them, you can, and they know that it's okay, to talk to you.
And how that's particularly true about veterans benefits. The Veterans Benefits Administration can be challenging to accept documents from the civilian world. I've learned that through experience. How is a healthcare power of attorney that you can give to your doctor, how is that different than completing, say, a HIPAA release with your doctor?
Sure. So the HIPAA authorization or the HIPAA release is just stating who has access to your medical records. So who can get the records, who can authorize transfer of the records. So we always do a HIPAA authorization in conjunction with the healthcare power of attorney, but the healthcare power of attorney is a decision-making authority. So healthcare power of attorney says, this is who can speak for me and make care decisions if I can't. The HIPAA authorization just says you can access the records. It doesn't allow you to actually coordinate the care or make the decisions. You really should have both. While the healthcare power of attorney theoretically should also have HIPAA rights, the laws are pretty strict. And so in an abundance of caution, we always recommend you have both. So your healthcare power of attorney and your agent's name should be the same people who are named on a HIPAA authorization.
Yeah, that kind of makes sense. Now, some people are afraid to do that kind of paperwork, like a power of attorney, because they feel like, oh, if I name my daughter, she's gonna like throw me in a nursing home.
Yeah.
When do these documents actually go into effect? Like, when is it decided, or who decides that you need that power of attorney to speak on your behalf?
Sure. So the answer to that question is a little bit different from a financial perspective versus a healthcare perspective. So I'm going to break them up. But from a financial perspective, your power of attorney can be either durable or springing. So a durable financial power of attorney is effective immediately. So theoretically, I sign a durable financial power of attorney. Whoever I've named could take that to the bank as soon as I've executed with the notary, and they could access my accounts. Now, this is part of kind of what Tammy was saying of like, while you have capacity, add these to your accounts, but that person then does have the access right away. But it's important that you're choosing someone you trust for that reason, right? But people who especially aren't naming their spouse, or people who don't have an adult child who they really trust, sometimes want to do something called a springing financial power of attorney instead.
Mm-hmm.
And what that means is it springs into effect upon the happening of some event in the future. That event is two physicians, generally independent physicians who are treating you, certifying that you don't have capacity. So that says, okay, if I can't make my own decisions, someone else can do it, but they can't do it until I have been deemed to be incapacitated. So it provides a little bit more security. It's certainly a little bit more difficult to act, but with financial things, it's,
better. It's safer.
Yeah, and nobody likes to pay their bills late, but it's not generally like an emergency crisis. Like if you get a late fee, they'll waive it, whatever. From a healthcare perspective, you can't have a springing healthcare power of attorney, because the nature of a healthcare power of attorney is someone else can't come and speak for me and coordinate my care unless I can't do it for myself. And so in that situation, again, it's on the physician to be determining, do you have capacity to make your own decisions or not? Now, there are times where someone has the power of attorney in place, but the person who made the power of attorney is saying, I can still manage all my own stuff. It's a little bit gray. Your agent is saying you're not making safe decisions. We then do sometimes need to get the doctors involved, have them fill out a form that, kind of goes through all the different areas of daily living of what you can and can't do for yourself. And if there's still kind of a conflict, that is sometimes when we do end up in court getting a guardianship to remove someone's rights to make their own decision. But again, that's the most restrictive option, and we want to avoid it if at all possible. So, pick people you trust and make sure you have the conversations in advance.
Absolutely. Now, is there a safety? I don't know if safety is the right adjective, but is, for lack of a better one, is safety a consideration when you're naming somebody as a financial power of attorney versus, say, just adding them to your bank accounts?
Sure. So if you add someone to your bank account, they generally then become a joint owner. So they have access to the assets as if they are their own, and they can do whatever they want with them. Whereas a power of attorney, you have a fiduciary obligation to still manage the assets in the way the person who owns the assets would want you to. So absolutely more protection. One of the things we talk about, many of our clients will name adult children, for instance, on bank accounts, we call them accounts of convenience. You want to make sure if you're doing that, you're not commingling funds. So adult child isn't also putting money in that account, because if you have a long-term care need, if we need Medicaid, that becomes a whole mess you don't want to be dealing with.
Yeah.
But the other thing is, if you have a power of attorney in place, you don't have a joint owner, then you need to look and make sure that account has a beneficiary or a pay on death. So, you know, you can provide for you while you're living, but you also want to do the best you can to avoid probate if at all possible, so that you're not looking at Medicaid liens to recover, and we're providing for a smooth transition of your assets if you pass. So if you have an account and have a joint owner, the assets will pass to that joint owner upon your passing. If you have an account, it's your own account, and you only have a power of attorney on it, it provides a little bit more protection while you're alive, but then that account would have to go to probate if you didn't have a beneficiary on it. So just, you know, double check always that the rule we say is every asset should have a joint owner or a designated beneficiary. That designated beneficiary could be a trust if we want some additional protection in place, but you always want to look to both of those two things.
That's awesome. Tammy, how have you found these things to be helpful in your role as a caregiver?
Well, generally, my mom happens to also be blind, and she doesn't use a computer. So making phone calls for things is difficult for her. And so we have power of attorneys on file at different places. And so a lot of times I can call and they'll just provide me the information that she wants me to get. But some places don't allow the power of attorney, and they'll still make her get on the phone and verify her information and things, which is fine. It's just an extra step, you know, as long as she's cognizant enough, you know, which thankfully she is. But, you know, it can be a difficult situation if you had a crisis, or if you're trying to make the phone call and you're not in the same location as them, and things like that. So.
And we saw, like with my grandfather, so he had multiple sclerosis. And so projecting his speech was difficult. He cognitively was all there, understood what was going on, could speak. But on the phone, it was hard to hear and understand. And sometimes there were still places that would make him get on and confirm his info and would have difficulty, you know, hearing what he was trying to say. And you know, all that to say, you do the best you can. Like, we plan as much as we can. It's not a perfect world. Every financial institution has their own rules and their own forms. But that's why if you're doing this and making the list of assets and the login information in advance, you know, the online login information is key too, because if your loved one has to call with the power of attorney, it's more difficult. If they can log into your account online, if they need to, and get the information, you know, that's a lot easier. You still want to safeguard that, obviously, and you have to make sure that you're giving it to someone you trust. But that's where attorneys come in too, because sometimes we hold that information for a client in their file, and we are authorized, if we have a determination of incapacity, for instance, now we can coordinate with the family and speak to your agent under your power of attorney and provide this information. So maybe you don't give them everything now, but we know where to find it, or we know how, you know, what's the code to your safe where you keep it. I'm not going to your house to get in your safe, but I know that I don't give it to someone unless these things are happening. So there's a lot of safeguards you can put in place.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And, you know, for anybody watching, you know, June was World Elder Abuse Awareness Day. So if your bank is calling you and asking you for your account information and your PIN, hang up, because it's a scam.
Actually, Tammy and I were speaking right before this about, you know, just kind of some prep and some tips and tricks. And one thing we were talking about is how many scams target elders. And I think another important thing is just to be reviewing your elder loved one's bank account statements from time to time, because often these scams start small and get bigger and bigger and bigger over time. And so if you're reviewing that stuff, even if they have capacity, just kind of helping them keep an eye on the things, you know, you can often catch these things sooner than later, because it definitely can be very tragic.
Yeah, sometimes those scam artists will kind of like ping your account for like a small amount, like $1.73, just to see if you notice.
Yep.
And then, oh, you didn't notice for 48 hours? Boom.
Yep.
And yeah, it goes sideways quick.
Yeah. We have a bunch of information on our Facebook too about scams that target elders, and kind of some tips and tricks for preventing and safeguarding information that are helpful to check out, because it's so sad how much of that happens.
To the tune of billions of dollars.
Right.
Now, you mentioned the Conversation Project. Is that something that will help families kind of initiate these conversations, and then they can reach out to you guys to get the formal documents?
Yeah, absolutely. So it just kind of walks people through some ways to have the conversation with your loved one about how they want end of life care handled, without saying like, hey, you're going to die someday, right? So what do you want? And people have different levels of like comfort with having that conversation. Some people are very direct and they want to talk about it. But I'll tell you, many of my clients who are ready to talk about it with their kids don't want to talk about it. So, sometimes it's the actual elder being the one starting the conversation and saying, here's how I'm going to guide my kids through this. And sorry, but you have to sit and listen to it, because unfortunately, death and taxes, right? It's like the only things that are guaranteed. And so it's going to happen to us all, but let's put a plan in place, so that if something happens, and listen, I'm in my late 30s, like I have these documents in place. So of course, I think they're important. They're very important for seniors, because unfortunately, the nature of the life cycle is you are closer to death, most likely, than a younger person. But these are things that everybody should be thinking about and talking about. I'm amazed how many even young spouses I sit with, and they have no idea whether their spouse would want to be cremated or buried, or what they would want for end of life. And again, these things suck to talk about. Nobody wants to talk about them, but you do it, and then you're done with it, and you get it off of your list. Kind of mentally, you can take a breath, and you don't have to worry about it, because if something happens, you have a plan. Things are provided for.
Yeah. And Tammy, do you find that you're more comfortable having these conversations with your friends, with your peers, because of your experience as a caregiver?
Oh, probably. I mean, I'm pretty outspoken, so it's I just tell it like it is. I mean, I've seen a lot, and I've done a lot. So, and I have a medical background too. So, yeah, it's just reality. It is what it is. And sometimes, like she said, if you have the conversation, it can be over with, and then it's done, but then
Exactly. So. Yeah, I sometimes recommend, like this time of year when you're having the family cookout, and that spot after like you've had your burgers and dogs, but it's not quite time for marshmallows yet. Like, and y'all just like sitting around chatting, like hum it out there. Hey, if I'm in a car accident on my way home, I want ABC XYZ. And yeah, you're going to hear like the record scratch, but like your family's all there. So they're hearing it from you saying it. And kind of start that conversation.
Talking. So then everybody is kind of sharing and talking about life experiences. We see all the time what gets someone to do the planning is because they went through it with their own parents, and they don't want their kids to go through what they had to go through.
Yeah.
So, the thing about planning is, even though it's hard to do it, it's really a gift to your children and your loved ones. You're really making sure the transition and the difficulty of losing you is as easy as possible for them. And during those difficult moments of end of life, and then after you've passed, they can focus really on what they need to do emotionally to heal, and the funeral and all of that, instead of dealing with all of the legalities and this other stuff. That stuff can wait if you have the right plan in place.
Absolutely. And I think too, it allows you that control over your body and what you want. Mm-hmm. And it also stops the family bickering of, you did that because mom liked you best, and you didn't do that because you're not the favorite, and all that nonsense.
It's so true. I say all the time. So I have 4 children. So I say part of estate planning and putting a plan in place, powers of attorney, trust planning, is preservation of family harmony when you're gone. Like, we all want our kids to have good relationships. We can't guarantee it, but we do the best we can. And one way you can set them up for success in that area is to make it clear what you want, so it's not up to them to decide. You'd be amazed, or maybe not, but how many clients I have who come and say, well, that client or that daughter would pull the plug right away. She has no emotions. And like, that kid would keep me alive forever, right? And it's like, probably what you want is somewhere in between the two. So you need to make it known, or they're going to be fighting and nothing will ever get done.
Exactly.
And you can put it in writing, so that all that they have to do is follow, what your written wishes are.
Yeah.
Or do the DNR and let the doctor decide.
Yeah.
And that's the kindest thing to do, is to put it in writing, so that all they have to do is follow what you're, caregivers have an immense amount of guilt over all kinds of different things, and most of which they have no control over. But if you can put it in writing and say, in this situation, this is what I want to happen, you're my power of attorney, and then you, as the power of attorney, act on those wishes, then nobody else can say, hey, you didn't do what they would have wanted. It's just the kindest thing to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, one more thing just to mention, because Tammy made me think of this when she talked about, how much caregivers have on their plate, is caregiver burnout is a really very real thing. And so we're talking about how we care for our elderly people, but you need to make sure that as a caregiver, you're checking in with yourself too. Like, are you taking care of your health physically, mentally? Tammy hears me preach about this all the time. But it's so important because you can't care for someone else if you're not taking care of yourself too. And so putting these plans in place gives you peace of mind that you're doing what you need to do in the way that your loved one would want, so you don't have that emotional burden. Make sure you're doing the things you need day to day to take care of yourself so you can care for your loved one too.
Yeah, absolutely. I've kept you guys like 3 times longer than I said I would. And I really appreciate this. Yeah, but it's a great conversation about the things that people generally are not really comfortable talking about. So this is awesome.
Yeah. Well, we're happy to get the information out there. We're also always happy to help facilitate the conversation if people need that too. So
awesome. Thank you, Tammy. Thank you, Sam. I'm really glad you were able to come on today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Everybody, these are not always the funnest, if that's a word, conversation, but they are really important conversations. And they're the kind of conversations and documentation that will actually allow you to maintain control throughout your whole lifespan. So super important. Feel free to reach out to Samantha. She can get all those documents in place. You can chat with Tammy. If you need help navigating health and social service systems, they've got Kirsten over there who can help you. So yeah, reach out to Samantha. She can have that conversation and get your ducks in a row so that, if something happens to you, it's not like herding cats. Well, I am so glad on this fabulous summer morning that you have joined me today for Friday Friends. Make sure you hit the like button, the share button, all those social media cues, telling people you got to check this out because this is a really important conversation. And I look forward to seeing you all again next week. In the meantime, be well and be kind.
If you like this video, please follow us on social media and subscribe on YouTube. For more information, visit rielderinfo.com or call 401-585-0509. If you have any questions, email deb@rielderinfo.com.